My name is Tammy Morse, and I was 35 years old when my parents told me to skip my sister's wedding and then be gone for good. Growing up, I always knew my sister was the golden child. Not because anyone sat me down and said it out loud, but because everything in our house orbited around her like she was the sun and the rest of us were just furniture. My parents, Robert and Linda Morse, made it clear from day one that Madison, 2 years younger, prettier according to everyone, and blessed with an effortless kind of charm, was their little princess. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who didn't need as much, which somehow became the excuse for why I got less. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't a tragic Cinderella. I had friends, I made decent grades, I worked hard. And when I grew up, I built an actual life, a successful career in marketing, my own condo, enough savings to sleep at night without panic tightening my throat. But no matter what I did, it never measured up to Madison's existence. When I graduated college, they threw me a small dinner. Nothing fancy, just the three of them, a cake that tasted like it had been sitting in a grocery cooler too long, and my mom telling me, "Well, you did what you were supposed to do." When Madison got accepted into community college, they threw a party for 50 people, balloons, a banner, her favorite catered food. My dad made a speech about how proud he was. I remember standing near the kitchen doorway holding a stack of paper plates while people clapped for my sister like she'd discovered fire. That pattern didn't end in our 20s. It matured like rot that learns how to hide. I landed a 6-figure job at a prestigious firm, bought my condo, traveled to 15 countries, places I'd only seen in magazines when I was younger. Madison bounced between part-time jobs, moved back in with our parents twice, and collected sympathy like it was a second paycheck. Guess who got praised for being family-oriented? Madison. Guess who got criticized for being too independent and career-focused, like it was a character flaw? Me. But I kept trying anyway. That's the humiliating part. I kept showing up to family dinners. I kept sending thoughtful gifts for birthdays and holidays. I kept telling myself that someday, if I just stayed sweet enough, patient enough, generous enough, they'd finally see me as worthy of their love and respect. I was an idiot. The breaking point came 4 years ago when Madison announced her engagement to Trevor, a guy she'd been dating for 8 months. You would have thought she'd cured cancer based on my parents' reaction. Wedding planning consumed our family's entire existence overnight. Every conversation became Madison's dress, Madison's venue, Madison's flowers, Madison's guest list. Even the way my mother breathed changed, like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment, and everything before it was just a warm-up. I offered to help, offered to plan, offered to pay for parts of the wedding because I knew money was tight for them. Madison barely acknowledged my offers. My parents acted like I was being intrusive, like my support came with strings just because I existed. Still, I pushed down the sting and kept trying to be supportive. 2 weeks before the wedding, everything imploded. I was at my parents' house helping with last-minute decorations. My mother had me folding napkins into little swans, while Madison paced the living room like a celebrity in crisis. She was holding her phone with both hands, thumbs flying, eyes wet with rage. "What happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice soft. Madison turned on me with a face full of panic. "We're 1 chair short." I blinked. "1 chair?" "1," she screamed, like the number itself was an act of violence. "A distant cousin RSVP'd, and she's bringing a +1. Now we don't have enough room for everyone." My dad hovered near the hallway, looking uncomfortable. My mom stood by the fireplace with her hand pressed to her chest like she was about to faint. No one said, "This isn't the end of the world." No one said, "We'll fix it." Because in our family, Madison's emotions were an emergency. My emotions were background noise. I tried to be reasonable. "Maybe some people just won't come," I suggested. "It happens at every wedding. Someone always cancels last minute." Madison whipped around and glared at me with pure venom. "This is all your fault." I actually looked behind me, like she must be talking to someone else. "What are you talking about?" If you weren't taking up space, she said, voice shaking, we'd have enough room for everyone important. My stomach dropped. I'm your sister. Barely, she spat. You don't even feel like family anymore. You're just this awkward presence that makes everyone uncomfortable. The words stung, but I tried to stay calm. Madison, you're stressed. Let's just figure out the seating. No, she screamed. I'm sick of pretending. I'm sick of having you at family events where you just hover around looking miserable and making everyone else feel bad for having fun. I turned toward my parents. I honestly expected my father to step in, to tell her she was being cruel, to tell her she was out of line. Instead, my father cleared his throat. Tammy, honey, he said, rubbing the back of his neck like this was just a minor inconvenience. Maybe Madison has a point. The room went dead silent. Excuse me? I whispered. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. You have to admit, Linda said, voice tight, you've always been difficult at family gatherings. Difficult? My voice sharpened despite myself. You never seem happy, she continued. You make comments about our traditions. You don't participate in conversations. I participate plenty, I said, feeling heat rush to my face. Just because I don't squeal over every little thing doesn't mean I'm difficult. Madison pointed at me like she'd been waiting for that exact moment. See? Even now you're being defensive and negative. My father stood up and walked toward me. For 1 second, one stupid, hopeful second, I thought he was going to comfort me. Instead, he put his hands on my shoulders and looked me dead in the eyes. Tammy, he said carefully, like he was delivering a decision already agreed upon. We've been talking, and we think it might be better if you didn't come to the wedding. My brain stuttered. What? Just hear us out, my mother said quickly, as if she could smooth this over with the right tone. This is Madison's special day. We want everything to be perfect for her. With my energy there, my father added. We're worried about drama. I stared at them, trying to find the punchline. My energy? What drama? I asked, voice trembling now. When have I ever caused drama? You don't have to cause it, Madison said smugly, wiping her tears like she was victorious. You just bring this cloud wherever you go. People can feel it. I looked between all three of them, and that's when it hit me. They didn't just want me gone from the wedding. They wanted me gone. Period. My father exchanged a look with my mother, a silent, practiced kind of communication. Then he took a deep breath like he was preparing himself for something unpleasant but necessary. Actually, he said, we've been thinking about this for a while now. My throat went dry. Thinking about what? My mother finally looked at me, and her eyes were cold as winter. It means, she said, that the greatest gift you could give your sister is if you disappeared from our lives forever. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Madison watched me with anticipation, waiting for me to break down and beg. My parents looked uncomfortable, but determined, like parents putting down a sick pet for its own good. And the worst part? Something inside me didn't break. It clicked off. Okay, I said calmly. They all froze. Madison's face fell slightly, like she'd been deprived of the show she was counting on. Okay, my father repeated, stunned. Okay, I said again, steadier this time. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get. I walked to the coat closet and grabbed my jacket. Then I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom and pulled a small wooden box from the back of the closet. Jewelry my grandmother had left me. My real grandmother. The one person in that house who had ever loved me without conditions. When I came back down, they were still standing there, like they couldn't believe I wasn't fighting. I'll need a few days to arrange some things, I said, voice even. But you'll get your wish. Tammy, my mother started. I held up my hand. No. You've made yourselves very clear. I walked to the front door, and before I stepped out, I turned back one last time. Just so we're all clear, I said, my voice low and sharp. You're choosing to lose a daughter who has never done anything but try to love you, because your other daughter throws tantrums when she doesn't get her way. Madison opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I nodded once, like I was sealing a contract. Congratulations on your wedding, I said to her. I hope it's everything you dreamed of. Then I walked out and closed the door behind me, softly, like the final punctuation mark on a sentence I never wanted to finish writing. And standing on that porch, feeling the cold air cut into my lungs, I realized something terrifyingly simple. They wanted me gone. So I was going to disappear, but not before I took back every single piece of myself they'd been using. I didn't cry that night. That surprised me. I sat alone in my condo, lights off, city glow spilling through the windows, and waited for the collapse to come. The sobbing, the shaking. The moment where I realized I'd just lost my entire family. It never arrived. Instead, there was this eerie stillness, like something heavy had finally been lifted off my chest, and my body didn't quite know how to respond without the familiar pressure. The next morning, I woke up clear-headed in a way I'd never experienced before. So I started making calls. The first call was to my real estate agent, the same woman who'd helped me buy my condo 3 years earlier. She answered on the second ring, cheerful as always. "If you're thinking of selling," she said after I explained, "you're in luck. The market is hot. We could list this week." "Do it," I said without hesitation. The second call was to my bank. There was an account my family never really talked about because they didn't have to. A joint account my father and I had opened years ago when I was still in college. It was supposed to be for emergencies. Over time, it quietly became the account my parents used for everything. Vacations, holiday gifts, home repairs, Madison's bailouts. I had been the primary contributor. Not because anyone forced me, but because I believed helping my family made me a good daughter. Because I thought generosity would earn love. The balance sat at just over $47,000. I explained the situation calmly to the bank representative. I provided records, every deposit I'd made over the years. It was all documented, clean, undeniable. Within minutes, she confirmed I could withdraw $45,000, my money, immediately. The remaining $2,000, representing my parents' contributions, would be placed on a 72-hour hold for verification. I thanked her. Then I smiled. Madison's wedding was in 8 days. They'd need that money within the next 3. By the end of day 1, the condo was listed. By day 3, there were 2 interested buyers. By day 4, I started applying for jobs in other cities. Seattle had been calling to me for years. My company had an office there, and I'd been quietly turning down recruitment offers because my parents needed me close. I reached out to a contact and asked a simple question. "Is the offer still open?" It was. My phone started ringing the day after I left. At first, it was my mother, voicemails dripping with concern. "Tammy, honey, we're worried about you. You're overreacting. Let's just talk this through as a family." Then my father, his tone sharper, irritated. "This is childish. You're being spiteful. We didn't mean it like that." Madison alternated between half-hearted apologies and outright accusations. "You're trying to ruin my wedding," one message said. "I didn't mean it like that," another claimed hours later. I didn't answer any of them. On day 5, my mother showed up at my office. She cornered me in the lobby during my lunch break, eyes wild, makeup hastily applied like she'd rushed out of the house without looking in the mirror. "We need to talk," she said, grabbing my arm. I gently removed her hand. "No, we don't." Her face crumpled. "You didn't mean forever. We were all stressed." "You did," I said evenly. "You were very clear." "You can't just disappear," she snapped. "You're our daughter." I laughed quietly. "Funny. That's not what you said when you told me the greatest gift I could give Madison was to vanish from your lives." Her voice dropped. "The wedding is in a week." "I know." "She wants to invite you after all," my mother said quickly. "She realizes she made a mistake." "No," I replied. "She's realizing there might be consequences." My mother's lips trembled. "We can't access the money. I took out loans expecting it to be there." I met her eyes for the first time since she arrived. "That's not my problem anymore." Her breath hitched. "Tammy, you wanted me gone," I said calmly. "That includes my money." I walked away. That afternoon, I accepted the Seattle offer. 20% salary increase, signing bonus, Relocation covered. My last day would be the day after Madison's wedding. The phone calls became frantic as the date approached. My father left angry messages calling me vindictive. Madison left sobbing ones begging me to fix it. My mother sent paragraphs promising everything would be different. I didn't respond. The wedding went on. I know because a former coworker, Jess, whose cousin was invited, sent me updates. Apparently, the reception had been scaled back. Cash bar, grocery store cake. Madison cried through most of it, not because I wasn't there, but because her perfect fantasy had cracked in front of witnesses. 6 weeks later, I was in Seattle. New apartment, water view, silence. My condo sold quickly. I used part of the profit as a down payment. The $45,000 sat safely in my personal account, untouched. I blocked every family number, changed my email, redirected my mail. When my mother somehow got my new work number, my assistant told her I wasn't available for personal calls. When my father showed up at my building, the doorman turned him away. For 6 months, I lived without them, and I was happy. I made friends, dated casually, took weekend trips. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing myself for disappointment or criticism. I wasn't managing anyone else's emotions. Then the real consequences started to surface. Jess kept me updated, not out of malice, more like disbelief. Without my contributions, my parents were struggling. The loans they'd taken for the wedding piled up. Madison's marriage began to fracture almost immediately. Her husband, it turned out, had expected to marry into money. When that illusion collapsed, so did his patience. 14 months after I left, my grandfather passed away. I wasn't told about the funeral. I found out 2 days later when Jess called me, voice buzzing with shock. "Tammy," she said, "you need to sit down." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "Your grandfather left you everything." I nearly dropped the phone. Everything. The house, the investments, the insurance, the car collection. Madison got $5,000 and a letter. My parents got nothing. The inheritance was worth nearly $2 million. My grandfather had been watching all along. And in his final months, he'd made a decision that would change everything. I cried for the first time since the night I walked out. But not because of the money, because someone finally had seen me. And this time, there would be consequences no one could undo. I didn't attend my grandfather's funeral, not because I didn't love him, but because no one told me he had died until it was already over. That fact sat heavier in my chest than the inheritance itself. He had been the only one in that family who ever treated me like I mattered, the only one who asked about my work and actually listened, the only one who noticed when I stopped talking at dinner and gently pulled me back into the conversation with a question meant just for me. And they buried him without telling me. 2 days later, I was sitting on the edge of my bed in Seattle when Jess called again, still half breathless from disbelief. "I shouldn't know this before you," she said, "but everyone is losing their minds back here." I closed my eyes. "Because of the will." "Yes." The official letter from my grandfather's attorney arrived the next morning. I opened it slowly, hands trembling, not with excitement, but with dread. Money doesn't erase grief. It doesn't replace the ache of knowing I'd never hear his voice again. But as I read his words, something in me cracked open. He wrote about watching me quietly over the years, about noticing how often I was dismissed, how easily my generosity was accepted, and how rarely it was acknowledged. He wrote that he'd seen my parents rely on me while simultaneously treating me like an inconvenience. I wanted to make sure, the letter said, that the one grandchild who was never protected finally would be. He told me not to feel guilty, not to share, not to apologize. "Build the life they never believed you deserved," he wrote, "and don't wait for anyone's permission to be happy." I cried until my chest hurt. Of course, my family's reaction was exactly what you'd expect. The calls started immediately, from numbers I didn't recognize. Messages from distant relatives and family friends who hadn't spoken to me in years, all suddenly invested in my moral character. Family should stick together. He wouldn't have wanted this. "You know Madison is struggling." Madison herself didn't even have the courage to contact me directly. She sent a message through a mutual friend. She said my grandfather obviously hadn't been thinking clearly, and that the ethical thing to do would be to split the inheritance evenly. I deleted the message without replying. Instead, I hired a financial advisor. I invested conservatively, bought a house in the hills outside Seattle. Bright, quiet, mine. I donated $50,000 to a charity supporting estranged adult children because I'd learned the hard way how alone that road could feel. And then I blocked the rest of the numbers. For the next 2 years, my life was peaceful in ways I hadn't known were possible. I was promoted twice. I managed teams that respected me. My ideas weren't dismissed. My presence wasn't tolerated. It was valued. I met Ethan, a man who didn't flinch when I talked about my family, who didn't try to minimize it or rush me into forgiveness. He listened. He believed me. When I told him how my parents had told me to disappear, he looked genuinely horrified. "They treated you like you were lucky to be included," he said quietly one night. He reached for my hand. "People were lucky to have you. They just didn't deserve you." I started therapy around that time, not because I was falling apart, but because I finally felt safe enough to unpack what had happened. My therapist helped me see the patterns I'd lived inside for decades, the scapegoating, the emotional manipulation, the way my sister had learned to position herself as fragile and wronged, while my strength was used as proof that I didn't need care. "She wasn't competing with you," my therapist explained gently. "She was threatened by you. Your success made her feel smaller, so she had to make you smaller to survive." Understanding that didn't erase the hurt, but it freed me from the lie that any of it had been my fault. Jess continued to update me, not because I asked, but because she lived in the same town and couldn't avoid hearing things. My parents were struggling. Loans were piling up. The house was falling into disrepair. Madison's marriage collapsed less than a year in. Her husband had expected financial stability, and when it vanished, so did his patience. "She got fired again," Jess told me once. Something about running a side hustle on company time. I wasn't surprised. The family that once treated me like a burden was unraveling without me. And then, 6 months ago, I received a letter that made my stomach drop. It came from a law firm back home. My father was suing me. The claims were outrageous: elder abuse, manipulation, unjust enrichment. They accused me of coercing my grandfather into changing his will, of stealing money from the joint account, of abandoning my family and causing emotional distress. Madison joined the lawsuit, claiming my disappearance had triggered her depression and career instability. Reading those pages, I felt that familiar internal click, the same one I'd felt the night they told me to disappear. This time, though, I wasn't numb. I was ready. I'd kept everything: text messages, voicemails, emails, even recordings from that day in the living room when they told me the greatest gift I could give them was to vanish forever. I hired the best family law attorney I could find, a woman named Patricia, sharp-eyed and unapologetically ruthless. When she reviewed my evidence, she smiled. "They picked the wrong daughter to lie about," she said. And instead of just defending me, she suggested we go on the offensive, because the truth, it turned out, was finally on my side. Patricia didn't waste time. Instead of quietly responding to my parents' lawsuit like they expected, hoping I'd panic, settle, or give in, we filed a counterclaim: defamation, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. And then Patricia did something that changed the entire balance of power. She petitioned the court to make all communications related to my estrangement admissible as public record. That included audio recordings from the night they told me to disappear, text messages from my mother admitting they relied on me financially, emails from Madison celebrating how peaceful the family was without me, financial records proving the joint account was funded almost entirely by me. The most devastating piece of evidence surfaced late in discovery: an email Madison had sent me months after I moved to Seattle. She'd been drunk, rambling, honest in the careless way people are when they think they're safe. She wrote that she'd always felt like she was competing with me, that my success made her feel invisible, that the family was finally better without me, that she hoped I would stay gone forever so I wouldn't ruin the peace they'd found. That email alone destroyed their entire narrative. The mediation failed immediately. My parents refused to take responsibility for anything. They still believed guilt and pressure would work, so we went to court. Patricia warned me they might try to perform remorse. She didn't prepare me for how broken they looked. My father had aged years. My mother clutched tissues like a shield. Madison looked frantic, less spoiled princess, more cornered animal. Their lawyer was underprepared. Every argument collapsed under evidence. When the judge listened to the recording of my parents telling me the greatest gift I could give them was to disappear forever, the courtroom went silent. There was no way to reinterpret those words, no way to soften them. The judge dismissed their lawsuit in full. Then he ruled on my counterclaim. Damages awarded, enough to wipe out what little savings they had left. In his final remarks, the judge said something I will never forget. The plaintiffs explicitly instructed their daughter to permanently remove herself from their lives, then pursued legal action when she honored that request. This court finds their behavior reprehensible. Outside the courthouse, they tried one last time. My father stepped toward me, tears in his eyes. "We're still family," he said. "We made mistakes." I looked at all three of them. "No," I replied calmly, "we're not. You made that very clear years ago." Madison started crying, real tears this time. "I was jealous," she sobbed. "I was wrong. Please." "I believe you're sorry," I said, "just not for hurting me. You're sorry it finally cost you something." I turned and walked away. That night, I called Ethan. We moved our wedding up. Small ceremony, water view. Chosen family only. My biological family wasn't invited. They burned that bridge when they told me to disappear. Some people say I was vindictive. They're wrong. I didn't seek revenge. I sought peace. I built a life so full, so stable, so honest, that their absence became permanent. Not out of punishment, but out of self-respect. They wanted me gone forever. I gave them exactly what they asked for. They just never expected that losing me would cost them everything.